When it comes to talking about the next general election, people really are asking two questions. First of all, how will the Tories lose the next general election? And of course, I think the one that probably deserves its own video at some point in the future, how can Labour win the next general election? That's the real question that people are asking. How will the Tories lose? How can Labour win? Because as much as I do want Labour to win, and I think that Starmer is doing a pretty good job at the moment, I think he can do better. I absolutely think he can do better. And we're only going to watch this first part of this video because I want to sort of today focus on the Tories, and then maybe we'll pick up the part about Labour next time, or maybe we'll do it as a Pony Club video. I'm not sure. Well, maybe we'll do it as a Pony Club video next week. I think that'll be more fun. But I want to focus on that, just on the Tories today, because that's the real big question. How will the Tories lose? And we've seen time and time again on this channel, we've covered the data, the polling data that says the Tories are not in for a good time come the next general election. But there's more than one way to poll people, and that comes in the form of focus groups. And this is what we are getting today. Luke Tyrrell, and is it Luke Tyrrell? Yep, Luke Tyrrell, and he is pardon me, the director of More in Common, which is a big, pardon me, a big sort of focus group tester. They go out and they do work. They see what people are saying in these sort of different communities. So it's good to see what focus group is saying, because very often, especially, it's mostly the parties, political parties that do these types of focus groups. So you never really get to hear what those focus groups said. So it's kind of interesting that we are getting this type of information from these focus groups. So we're going to have to listen to what he says, and we'll sort of butt in every so often and comment on some of the stuff that he's saying. But I think this is very interesting. And it always comes back down to the fact that, as always, back in the day, Boris Johnson was walking a tightrope very, very successfully, and he managed to sort of straddle that tightrope while keeping those two different groups of people nicely counterbalanced. And we always said, once Boris Johnson was gone, whoever would be next, in this case, it would be Rishi Sunak, can he maintain that balance? And by the looks of it, it's something that he is going to struggle a lot with. So before we do get into this video, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. There is the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So let's go diving into this to see what they have to say about the Tories and how potentially the Tories will lose the next general election. Because I think this is very, very interesting information, and especially, as we said, information garnered not from just polling people, but from actual focus groups, which can be, if you've ever been a part of a focus group, can be very, very interesting. But we'll see. We'll see what he's got to say first. Like I say, we'll comment when some of the stuff comes up. So here we go.
The party that will win the next election is the one that can convince people, or best convince people, that it's okay to turn on the 6 o'clock news and not be worried. And people will say this. We've had Brexit. We then had the Brexit wars. We then had the pandemic. We had Partygate. We had the mini budget. We've got the cost of living crisis. People really are exhausted. So that is the frame that I'd like you to bear in mind.
I absolutely agree. I think no matter who you talk to in the UK, you do get that sense, that feeling of political exhaustion. And that is really what the story has been really since 2016. And yet we're in 2023 now, and people just feel politically exhausted. They want to be able to sit down and just not worry about it. And I absolutely agree, because the same thing I hear up in up in the north, all the time when you do some little what I like to call pub sitting. Especially on the weekends, I sort of like to go on a walk. I'll plan a walk to like a local pub or something like that. I'll just go there, sit and have a pint, and sort of enjoy myself. Especially during the summer, it can be very nice sitting out. And that's generally what you can hear sometimes about the people sort of sitting around you. And that's what you hear. They are politically exhausted and they just want someone in charge who can just go, okay, everyone, calm. And as we're about to hear, Rishi Sunak's certainly not that guy, as we're about to hear in a moment. But we'll let him continue.
Second frame, and this isn't a partisan point, it comes from Tory, Labour, Liberal Democrat, SNP voters, is this sense that Britain has stopped working. Whenever.
Oh, absolutely. That's another phrase you constantly hear. The idea that Britain is not working, or pardon me, or Britain is broken. That is another constant phrase you hear all the time. Absolutely.
Whether in polling or focus groups, we ask people to describe the country in one word. The word that they use is broken, usually followed by chaos, shambles, something like that. And what makes this so powerful, I think, from a political perspective, is that everyone has a story about how it's affecting them. Now,
and that is important. We human beings love to tell stories, and especially stories that we can relate to. So, this is one thing that Boris Johnson did absolutely amazingly well, because Boris Johnson, say what you will about him, but Boris Johnson is an incredible public speaker. There is no, pardon me, there is no one out there. Certainly, I would say any other potential Tory MP or any MP out there who can give a public speech quite like Boris. And Boris, when he was campaigning in 2019, told a story. And he told a story to the British people about how they were trying to get Brexit done. They were being frustrated because it was a hung parliament. And look, everyone was fed up with all this stuff. So you know what? If you want to get all this mess sorted out, you've got to vote for us. And that was the story that Boris was telling. Meanwhile, you had Jeremy Corbyn running around going, free broadband, and people didn't really understand that. And like I say, the 2019 campaign was an absolute mess, and people will try and say any other way to try and blame it on someone else. But I'm sorry, Corbyn lost that election, and there were valid reasons why he lost that election as well. For example, your red wall voter trusted Boris Johnson more than Jeremy Corbyn. So your types like Owen Jones cannot fathom for a second, like they've never just really stopped to ask themselves this question: why on earth would someone who is in the red wall, who might be, working class, voted Labour, from from the very beginning, all of a sudden decide to not vote for Corbyn and vote for Boris Johnson instead? They cannot fathom that question. And the thing is, there's a lot of people who just go, oh, racism. No, 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 no. It goes far, far beyond that. If racism was the real answer, then UKIP would have had a massive surge. UKIP would have never of taken the dive that it would have. So there was always more going on. And, your types like, your Owen Joneses can't even seem to understand that basic principle or even stop to ask themselves that question, because if they did, then they might not like the answer, unfortunately. But there you go.
A Partygate was particularly potent because, unlike, say, the PPE rows, which didn't really cut through and people could relate to, with Partygate, everyone could say, well, I didn't go to that wedding. I didn't go to that funeral. I lost that. And actually, with the sense of Britain being broken, everyone's experiencing it. Everyone, whether it's a wealthy group in Surrey, whether it's the group we did more working class voters in Blyth, says, I can't get a GP appointment. And there's this weird 8 a.m. scramble to try and ring up and, maybe I'll get a call back at some point in the future. With the cost of
And you only have to look at why that is. This is an area where I think if Labour were to put across the right story of the Conservatives came into power and they are the ones who broke Britain. We are the ones to fix it. This is how we're going to fix it. That really, I think, is the story Starmer has to tell. Because ultimately, as you've seen there with that GP appointment scramble, well, why is that? That is because the NHS has for years been told to do more with less, and then just do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, year after year after year. And it's gotten to a point where it can no longer do more with less because it doesn't have enough to even do beyond some of the basic stuff. So that is really important. And I think that Labour should focus on one of their key points of fixing the NHS and go out and say, this is specifically how we are going to fix it. And tell that story. Because, as you said, telling stories really important when it comes to especially talking with and negotiating, or well, not what, but engaging with everyone, even people who you don't know. Telling a story is the way to sort of do it.
of living, we talk a lot about the group who are and choosing between heating or eating, and it's true they're the group that's struggling with, but the group just above that are struggling, and they're saying things like, well, yeah, I don't take my kids on days out anymore because it's too expensive. I feel like I'm working to live and living to work. And against that backdrop, it's quite easy to see why the Conservatives are struggling.
It's not just the fact that they are struggling, it's they are the party who is most responsible for our current predicament. And partly because now all their actions through austerity are now starting to affect, well, their voters. And they haven't even realized that, that's what they've done. That's what their austerity has done in their drive to try and shrink the size of the government, try and, take, be the sort of, small g conservative. That's effectively what they've done. That's why the COVID inquiry is focusing on austerity as a starting point, as something which destroyed our pandemic response. So, again, something that should be told and factored into when Keir Starmer is telling that story about what the Conservatives have done to the UK.
You add into that this perception that not only are things not going that well and a little bit chaotic, but that the Conservative Party is to some degree the cause of that chaos. And you really get this perfect storm for them. And, these are some of the phrases we've heard in recent groups. I've always voted Conservative, but the horse has bolted this time. After Party Man and the woman who was there for 6 weeks, why do you expect us to vote for them again? It's just gone on for too long. They need some time in opposition. So that gives you the.
And another thing I want to bring up, we have talked about that missing 10%. Bear in mind, the last local election, that missing 10% didn't come back. They desperately brought in Lee Anderson as the deputy party chairman in the hopes that he could rally those in the north, the red wall to their side, but he he didn't. It was an absolute failure to sort of do so. And we saw, very much so, Conservatives who are normally the most likely group to go out and vote, not vote But also, interestingly, as they said there, vote for someone else. Vote for the Liberal Democrats. Vote for Labour. So there's not just opportunities for Labour at the next general election, but for the Lib Dems as well.
And that's the sort of thing that people are saying about the parties. I'd say it's slightly more generous when it comes to people talking in focus groups about Rishi. So one of the first things that people will say is, we think he's quite competent. Oh yeah, he knows what he's doing. And I think this is really important.
That changes in a bit. That changes in a bit because obviously, big factor for Rishi Sunak is furlough. That is still in a lot of people's minds that furlough did come into fact. I think he's about to mention that actually, that furlough did help a lot of people during the pandemic. And you can turn around and say, well, I wouldn't have a job if not for Rishi Sunak. So I wonder if at the next election, Sunak's going to play on that. Because to be honest, if you think about what cards can the Conservatives play, well, that might be the only card Rishi Sunak can potentially play. And maybe that's also why he doesn't want those pandemic diaries, those WhatsApps handed over from Boris Johnson, because then we might get to see more background into just what was going on. And maybe Rishi Sunak might have a differing opinion about furlough than most people suspect. So we'll see what happens there.
And because often, public have quite short memories in politics, they always in focus groups turn back to furlough and they will say, he saved my job during furlough. He meant that I still got paid. So that's his big plus. And it is definitely true that he's outperforming his party. That doesn't mean that people like him much more than Starmer, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. He is definitely more popular in the focus groups, as with the polls, than the Conservatives are. The challenges he faces are one, and I couldn't quite understand when Labour originally, rather than going on his wealth or other things, tried to paint him as weak.
Yep. What have I been saying about Rishi Sunak? How weak he has been. You can obviously see just how weak he is, and we'll get into this a bit more. We'll let him talk about what the focus groups have been saying before we continue with more about that. But yeah, absolutely weak, weak, weak. He has no spine. He is a complete and absolute jellyfish.
But what's interesting is that an emerging theme from the focus groups is he strong enough? And that's particularly exacerbated by the constant returns to the stage of Boris Johnson. So you get people saying things in focus groups like, why can't he just get rid of Johnson? Why can't he stand up to Johnson? And it's,
yeah, why can't he get rid of Johnson? Why can't he? Yeah, because he's just that weak. Sunak is not in a good position, and this is because of how fractured that we've talked about a lot, how fractured the Tory party is. It is incredibly fractured with all these different groups vying for power, for influence, to get people that on their side in their cabinet positions. It is an absolute mess. And this was all caused because of, well, the ERG. Because all the different Tories, well, if the ERG was so successful in getting what they wanted, maybe I should form my own group of like-minded, conservatives who want their own, crazy ideas. And we've seen these groups spring up since Brexit continually. And Sunak cannot juggle them all. And Boris, because this very much started under Boris, allowed them to flourish, and they have become strong. And unless, it's probably not going to be Sunak, but unless a future Conservative leader can actually sort them out, this is going to be a problem that plagues the party for decades, because people do not vote for a divided party. And the most divided party in British politics at the moment is the Conservatives.
it's translating into a general thing, in a focus group in Surrey. One woman said, yeah, but that's the problem with little Rishi. You just can't stand up for us on the world stage.
I love that. I love that. That's the problem with little Rishi. Oh my word. You've probably seen a couple of the memes I've posted over the couple of years, insinuating the shall we say the stature of our current prime minister and his childlike antics. That I think I've got one coming out tomorrow about the size of the shoes that he's wearing. But yeah, that is kind of funny that is really sticking. But again, it just goes to show you how weak he is. He does not stand up to anyone in his party, and it's not just Boris Johnson. He doesn't stand up to anyone in his party. So if he can't stand up to his own party, how on earth could he stand up to like Joe Biden or anyone else on the international stage? Currently he's out in America trying to get an American trade deal. Biden's not going to do that. Why would he? But well, yeah, that is hilarious. The fact that is really cutting through. So if I were Labour, I'd be making lots of little Rishi memes. I would be making them, so much.
And so that really, don't worry, I'll tell you some of the rude things people said about Starmer too, in the interest of balance. But that sense of him not having control over events risks eroding that competence advantage that he clearly has.
And let me just tell you about that competence advantage, because at the moment, Sunak has done nothing to try and solve inflation. He's really done nothing to solve the economy. Now, he said, I'm going to unleash these Edinburgh reforms, which are going to sort of, cause a big boom 2.0. But as lots of people have said, all you've really undone is a lot of banking protections that came in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. So if we were to have another big banking shock, which is very, very likely, then it could be just as bad as what happened in 2008, because Rishi has removed all those. As we said, he's doing nothing about inflation. He's just hoping inflation just goes away. He's not actually doing anything to reduce inflation. The small boats, we've said it, I don't know how many times. You could pretty much deal with small boats overnight by creating safe routes. If you did that, you destroy that model for for like the people smugglers to send people over. Small boats the numbers would decrease overnight and eventually drop down to nothing. Because once you have that safe route, well, then they don't need to use these small boats. And then the other thing you need to do is refund the asylum system. And not just the asylum system, but the entire judiciary system as well, because that's something else that the Tories very much responsible for. But there you go.
With the public. And then you get to the really interesting split amongst the Conservative base about Rishi. So we have, Roy Common has a segmentation. Please do go and look at it that we've done of the British public. But two groups are really interesting because I think they're going to be the most important groups in the next election.
I agree. I very much agree. And of course, the groups he's talking about are, of course, those red wall voters who switched to the Conservatives for the first time, and of course, those down in the south, those more conservative liberals. So we'll see what they've got to say about Rishi. But to be honest, as we said at the beginning, that tightrope that Boris could very, very easily balance, I don't think he can do it. I really don't think he can do it at all.
And you saw them feeding through in a lot of that polling. One group, they're called Loyal Nationals, or we call them Loyal Nationals. They're basically what you'd think of as a red wall voter. They are quite socially conservative, swung behind Boris at the last election, but economically, definitely not traditionally conservative. Big believers in tackling inequality, and supporting the NHS and delivered those victories in 2019 in the Red Wall. With that group, there is no doubt that Sunak is continuing to struggle, and they are the group who finds his wealth most difficult to deal with. And it's not from an anti-aspiration perspective, but it's a bit like, you'll get comments like, you just don't wear shoes like that to a building site. It's this idea of kind of having more money.
So that's again, that is kind of funny that is one of the things that's affecting the group. But two things that should be absolutely, I think, and as said, should be played ad nauseum coming up to the next election and during the next general election. First of all, the clip of Rishi bragging about taking money away from those seats. I think he's going to bring up the fact that these voters especially voted for the Conservatives because they thought that they were finally going to get money into their areas. And of course, that's not happened. But also the inability of Rishi Sunak to use chip and pin, where he looks like as if he is just an alien completely got off a spaceship and just does not understand what is going on. He's just waving the card in front of it, not even close to the card reader, just waving it in front of it. If you've ever seen the video, yeah, it just goes to show you just how out of touch he is with those voters, and it's something that Boris Johnson could do with his speech, with his his cheeky boy attitude that he had. Rishi can't do that, and as I said, if you focus on one of them, you lose the other. If you focus on that, well, you lose the other. And it's just that tightrope situation. Boris could do it like that. Rishi can't. And I think that is potentially what we're going to see. Him lose one of those group of supporters, if not potentially both. But I think certainly losing one is more likely.
Then sense the swing call cut through prior to the leadership contest, some of the tax affairs stuff had cut through, because this is a group who are struggling with the cost of living crisis, and they think he can't relate to our lives. And in both our polling and our focus group, we found him really struggling with that group who did quite like Boris Johnson pre-Partygate. Flip to the other side of the Tories electoral coalition, we call this group established liberals. They're more found in what's become known as the blue wall.
What did I tell you? Blue wall, red wall. Rishi can't prioritize which one he really wants to save. And as we said, if he loses the red wall, he doesn't win the next election. If he loses the blue wall, he doesn't win the next election. He's got to at least keep both of them. And to be honest, to be able to satisfy both these groups of people who want very, very different things, he's not going to be able to do that. I really struggle to see how he is going to do that. I really, really do.
They are more economically right-wing, but more socially liberal. I guess you might call them Cameronite conservatives. Really didn't like Boris Johnson, tended to vote Remain. He just, really, really moved away from the party during the mini budget episode. Actually quite like Rishi Sunak, saying, we've got one of ours back in charge of the Conservative Party again, which is quite interesting, given Rishi's actually quite socially conservative on lots of things. And I think, there is one world in which that social conservatism brings back some of those loyal nationals in the red wall and keeps the established liberal, more blue wall voters and leads a recovery. There's another world where he sort of falls between two stools of that vote in the red wall still most concerned about cost of living in the NHS and don't really believe you're actually going to do anything on small boats. And that skepticism about boats is really powerful. People care about it. They just don't think the government's going to fix it. And these more liberal voters work out, no, actually, he's not David Cameron reincarnated, and shift away as well. I don't know which way, or it could stay on the current track where the different parts of the coalition think different things. So,
and that's what I think is really going to happen, because we're going to stop it there, because I think he goes on talking about sort of Labour now. So, but yeah, I agree. I fully agree with that assessment. It's what I've been saying for quite a while, that these two different competing interest groups want vastly different things, and Sunak cannot satisfy them both. And when you look at the cost of living crisis, well, what is Sunak doing about the cost of living crisis? He's not doing a thing. He's not continuing with leveling up. He's actively seemed to have almost abandoned it. The small boats, we've already said what he needs to actually do to solve this crisis, but he ain't going to do it because setting up safe routes would massively upset, I think, a lot of people in that coalition. There is no way in hell Sunak can balance as well as Boris Johnson could. That is the fact. And we've been saying that for quite some time. Even when Boris Johnson was teetering on the edge, we were like, well, who's going to come in? Who's going to be able to continue that balancing act that Boris was able to do? There is no one. And even then, if they go on to lose a general election, ultimately Rishi will step down and will get out of Dodge as very quickly. It will open up a leadership contest, the likes of which we have not seen, because they will proceed to absolutely rip each other to shreds. There will be no harmony in the Conservative Party for quite some time, because there's all these different factions, all these different groups. There is no one out there who even can really seem to unite the party. Even Penny Mordaunt, as sort of popular as she's become, she's not universally liked in the party, nor even in the party base. Michael Gove certainly can't come back in because he's seen as a big betrayer of Boris, which again does not play with the pro-Boris crowd of the Conservative Party. You can just go through all sort of, the big names in the Conservative Party. There's not a lot of people who can really bring the party together. And the only way you can do that is if they would have to go into the party, start seriously knocking some heads together, which in itself is going to cause a lot of acrimony and just feed even more into the civil war and get your party back behind you. Say, enough of this nonsense, time to get back to business. There's no one in there who can do that. It's certainly not going to be Rishi Sunak. Little Rishi, weak little Rishi, he can't do that. He can't do it now. He hasn't done it against Johnson, didn't do it against Liz Truss when they both voted against him, had the perfect opportunity to remove the whip from them, didn't do it. Suella Braverman, Kimmy Badenoch, the list goes on and on and on and on of people he should be censoring for, damaging sort of the Conservative Party's reputation, damaging them in the polls. And he's not doing anything, not even bringing them into the office to read them the Riot Act and say, you need to behave. He's not doing the old finger wag against them. But it's not even, he doesn't even have the strength to even do that. So if that's the polling, if that is what you are getting from these polling, these policy groups, it's not good. It's not good at all for the Conservatives. So if you want to know how the Tories will lose the next general election, it is probably going to be because Rishi Sunak cannot maintain the balancing act of both the blue wall and the red wall. And it will come down to 3 scenarios. Either A, he will keep the blue wall, but he will lose the red wall. B, he will keep the red wall, but lose the blue wall. Or the third scenario, he pretty much drops everything and keeps neither. And those, I think, are how the Tories are going to lose the next election. They are going to lose the support of this new coalition that Boris Johnson built, that he was only really the one capable of building and holding together. And Rishi Sunak is going to come along, weak little Rishi, and he cannot maintain the balance. And sooner or later, it's going to drop. And it's going to come about in a general election. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. and we'll see you all next time.